Hello and welcome to the CYF Course. Today we will see together that we are called to make disciples. We are not just called to give Sunday school lessons or to make good meetings with children. We are not even called just to evangelize them and to bring them to Christ. We are called to make disciples. In Matthew 28, Jesus is very clear in his mission that he gave us. Go and make disciples of all nations. Whatever the age of people, we have this discipleship mentality. We see how can we help them grow in the Lord from a very young age. This is what we want to do. And this is something holistic, not just spiritual. And this is not something we can do in 1 hour every week. There is 168 hours every week. You cannot make disciples just with 1 hour in the week. 1 hour, 168 is not enough. You need a global vision, and we need to make disciples in the whole of life. But what is our part? What can we do as workers in the church, as King's Kids, leaders and stuff? What is our part? How can we do that? First, let's read a promise in the Old Testament, in Isaiah 54 verse 13. And this is a promise that is very encouraging because it is God doing it. It is not just the fruit of our efforts and good strategies. It's a promise of the Lord. All your children will be disciples of the Lord. I will make peace abound for your children. God will do it. But we need to align with Him and we need to listen to Him. What is discipleship? What is a disciple? In disciple, we have also the root of the word discipline. So it is a way to discipline children, to help them put in place a discipline of life, to grow in some areas. How did Jesus train his disciples? The goal was his disciples to become like their master. And when the disciple is like his master, we have reached the goal. So Jesus trained his disciple through 4 phases. The first one is, I do, you watch. Jesus was doing things, he was doing ministry, the disciples were looking at Jesus doing things. They were listening, they were watching, they were observing, they were learning by just being present and seeing how Jesus was doing that. Second phase is I do, you do with me. And Jesus started to include his disciples in his ministry. First with very practical thing, go and buy the bread, bring your boat closer to the beach and I will go into it, or find a fish for me. There are very practical things, and little by little he also brought them into the ministry of praying for people, bringing the gospel, praying for the sick, casting out demons. Jesus was close to his disciples and they often shared together and they were asking him questions. Why did you do that like this? Why did you say this kind of things? And we have some examples in the gospel where we see Jesus giving explanations to his disciples. It's a relational process. Then, third phase, you do, I do with you. Now Jesus is pushing his disciples a little bit more to the front. He's preparing them that he will not always be with them. So they need to become autonomous in the ministry. And Jesus asked them to pray for some sick people, or he sent the 70s and he stayed behind and he prayed for them. Jesus was very much involved in this practical way of training. And the fourth step is you do, I watch. When he sent the 70, it was a good example of that. And then Jesus was ready to go back to heaven. He sent the Holy Spirit to equip them. And the disciples start to reproduce his ministry as a whole church. They were his body on earth. And they were continuing what Jesus did when he was on the earth. Now he's in heaven, but his body is still on the earth. And this discipleship process is something we can train throughout the growth of the children through the years. And of course, when they enter in the teenage years, becomes a time where they really much become players and they are active. They cannot just continue to listen and watch and not being active themselves. If we want them to become disciples, they need to be active at one point. So we need to make disciples. Are we making disciples in our ministry? What did Jesus to make disciples? First, he called them, "Come and follow me." And some were very active in many other things, in fishing, in collecting money. Someone was a zealot, and so he was involved in manifestations, maybe even kind of terrorism at the time. So they were all very busy. And we need to make sure that we call the children not just to come to church, but to become disciples of Jesus, and that involves every aspect of their lives. Then Jesus chose them to have them with him. You may have many children in your children program, but who are the ones that Jesus is especially putting on your heart? You know, even Jesus, he had different circles. He chose 12. He was ministering to crowds, but the crowds were not disciples. The disciples had a special relationship with him. They were living closer to him. They were involved in his daily life. He was involved in their daily life. And he chose 12 of them to have them with him. You can read that in Mark 3, verse 14. So the main goal is not just teaching or Christianity or I don't know what. He wanted them to be with him. The relationship was what Jesus had in mind. But on the 12, he had a group of 3 that were closer to him. Peter, James, and John. He often took them with him for special events. When he resurrected the daughter of Jairus, when he went for the Mount of Transfiguration. There are several aspects where you see the 3 disciples being with Jesus. Why? Were they Jesus' favorites? I don't think Jesus had any favorite. Maybe they were those who were the most thirsty to be always with Jesus, and Jesus honored them by bringing them with him in some special situations. So who are the people, the children that God is especially putting on your heart for you to invest in? Maybe with a special thirst. Maybe you have a special burden for them. And you need to invest in them, not just in the meeting, but call them during the week. Make some activities. If you have yourself a family, invite them to do some activities with your family. And even in the 3, Jesus has a special one. A special friend, the disciple Jesus loved, John. And it was not a favorite, but this John had a special revelation of love, and he wanted always to be with Jesus. And you may have in your ministry some special people that you carry on your heart. So Jesus taught them. Jesus asked them questions. Jesus shared his life with them. He ate with them. They slept together. This is what we can do when we do camps or weekends. This is why these kind of settings are so important if we want to make disciples, because we can go much deeper in the relationship, in the teaching, in the experience of God, than we can only just for 1 hour during the week. Jesus trained them individually too. Sometimes he took Peter apart, he took John. They could ask questions to him. He was involved relationally with them. And this is so important. It's not just about ministry. It's about life sharing. Jesus involved them in his ministry. He brought them together. They followed the Lord together. And they learned from him. They called him Rabbi because he was their master and he was teaching them a lifestyle. He was passing on his lifestyle. He debriefed with them to help them integrate what they learned, what they experienced in their normal life. This is actually Deuteronomy 6 in action. Deuteronomy 6, you remember? You shall teach diligently these words to your children when you wake up, when you lay down, when you walk along the way, when you sit in your house. This is the context of daily life. That is the context for discipleship. And we need to make sure that we spend days. We had times where we can spend life together with the disciple that God gives us. No, 1 hour on 168 is not enough. But as it is a teamwork, how can we contribute as a church, as KKI, to support the work of parents? Because, of course, these are the parents who are every day with their children. But sometimes parents cannot do this job. Parents are absent, parents are unbelievers. And God will give us the grace and the right strategy to make disciples. So discipleship is key. How do we make disciples? There are several ways. First, we need to pray for them. You can see Jesus praying for his disciples. John 17 is one example. But we see also in Luke 22, verse 32, Jesus saying to Peter, I have pleaded in prayer for you, Simon, that your faith should not fail. Jesus was praying for Peter. Or in Galatians 4, verse 19, Paul is sharing his heart. Oh, my dear children, I feel as if I am going through labor pains for you again, and they will continue until Christ is fully developed in your lives. You can see prayer being compared to labor pains, the heart of the mother that Paul was sharing for his disciples. So if some people are really disciples that you want to invest in, start to pray for them and invest as much time in praying for them that you invest in preparing lessons. This is so important. Then your example. This is so important because the disciple will become like his master. Or if you take the analogy of Genesis 1, you will produce after your own kind. Who you are will be reproduced, not just what you say. So this is so important. I give you a few scriptures. 1 Corinthians 11 verse 1. And you should imitate me just as I imitate Christ. Or Philippians 3 verse 17. Dear brothers and sisters, pattern your lives after mine and learn from those who follow our example. Or last one, 2 Thessalonians 3 verse 9. We certainly had the right to ask you to feed us, but we wanted to give you an example to follow. So discipleship is about modeling something, giving the example, because the disciples will become like us. If you are an evangelist, I'm sure those who follow you will have a heart for evangelism. If you are very prophetic, I'm sure the one who follow you will become very prophetic because you sow after your own kind. This is a spiritual law. The third way to make disciples is through our relationships. It is, once again, very important. Invest time to get to know your disciples. Or, these are Jesus' disciples, never ours. Huh? Invest time to get to know them. Invest time for them to get to know you and to know your heart. Seek their heart. Open your heart. Offer your heart. It's about a heart-to-heart connection where we get to know and to love one another and to share life together. Make sure you practice encouragement. You have words of affirmation that you speak into their life. Because words of affirmation, as we have said already in the past, are the thing that brings to life the potential in their heart, that will establish self-confidence, that will establish trust in their own giftings and strength. And this is so important for them to be established. Practice listening. We'll speak about active listening. How do we do that? This is so important. Listen to them. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So practice listening. Listen to their heart. Not just to what they say. Read between the lines. What is really happening in their heart? Have faith in them. Be interested in them. Be interested in their passions. Be interested in their hobbies. Be interested in their practical life, in their family backgrounds. Be interested in how they are doing at school. Invest time to get to know them. We make disciples through opportunities to live and practice. And it is important. Life, Christian life, is practical. We want to bring the children into real practical activities, not just building doctrines in their mind. So teach them how to pray. Bring them with you in mission, in evangelism. Bring them with you in conferences where you pray for the sick, where you receive word from people. Bring them with you in building a meeting, in preparing something, in even cleaning after that, in eating together. Share life and share aspects of ministry with them. Make them live and experience practically the aspect of Christianity. We make disciples through mentoring and small groups. These are the aspects where we get really involved in the life of each other. Mentoring is pouring your life in someone. It's taking extended time with the person to really invest in the life of the person. It can be coaching. It can be in some specific areas where the child or the teenager needs some help, like handling pornography or masturbation, like some specific challenges in their family with situation with a girlfriend or boyfriend. There are some things like that where they need maybe some specific input, and working alongside them for a few times and help them to go through this different situation. We make disciples through life situations that are not planified, not planned, not expected. And this is so important. Jesus was doing that all the time. He was actually always watching during the day what was happening and using the life situation to teach his disciples. For instance, disciples were sharing who is the greatest. Oh, good teaching opportunity. And Jesus came and asked a question. What are you talking about? He knew already. But he saw that as an opportunity to teach and to bring the kingdom. Or the disciples were in a field and they were harvesting some corn to eat it, but it was Sabbath day and the Pharisees were very upset. Oh, good teaching opportunity. And Jesus came and shared something. Or a Roman officer was full of faith and his servant was healed. Oh, Jesus saw that as an opportunity to teach about faith also. So Jesus was always using what was happening during the day to train his disciples. Because discipleship, you can use anything for discipleship. Everything is for the good of those who love God. It is said in Romans 8. So discipleship is a mentality. You can be wired every day and make disciples through any opportunity that presents itself. And then, of course, you can teach. You can go through a collective teaching, frontal, in front of people. This is what you use usually, but this is only one of the tools. Teaching is important. It is very important, but this is not the only way. This is why I put it in the last, because usually this is the main thing we think. Oh, we have a course of discipleship, and there is a lot of speaking. But discipleship is much more than that. And I would like you now to see the different questions that we have at the end of this session, and that you get in 2s or 3s and that you share about these questions. Are you really making disciples, or are you making programs of lessons? Are you really having a relationship? What kind of example are you giving? Are you praying for the kid that the Lord has entrusted you with? May the Lord bless you and lead you in this process.